So in the textbook, Corey Floyd writes a little bit about how relationships come together and how they come apart. And I've actually created supplemental notes that connect to this, and for two reasons. One is that in the coming apart side, which is on page 300, there's actually a difference in how I present one of the stages, and that stage is differentiating. But the other thing that is also worth noting about this is that the images that are shown in the text are different than the image that I include in the supplemental notes and that I'm going to talk about here in this lecture. And there's a really good reason for that. And so so these are the 5 stages of coming together: initiating, experimenting, intensifying, integrating, and bonding; and coming apart: differentiating, circumscribing, stagnating, avoiding, and terminating. So I'm going to show you these stages in the development model that was created by a researcher named Knapp in the middle of the 20th century to demonstrate how our relationships, and maybe it was even later in the 20th century, 1980s or so, but it talks about how our relationships do come together and they come apart. And the reason that I show this as this model and not the same that's shown in our textbook is because, as you can see here, we've got stages. There's steps that build towards, on the coming together side, they build towards the area circled relational maintenance. It's sort of the overlap, the Venn diagram of where we're maintaining a solid relationship. And on the coming apart side, there are stages that are kind of at the top of that coming apart staircase, indicating that they're not really as heavy or intense and leading to coming apart as ones that are further down the staircase, like the stagnating, avoiding, and eventually terminating. And you'll notice too that differentiating and circumscribing are in the relational maintenance circle at the top, along with integrating and bonding. And that to me is an important difference to note from what you see in the text, which is side-by-side bubbles that lead towards the end of coming together, which is bonding, and the end of coming apart, which is terminating. Because you can be in stages that are officially sort of coming apart and still be in a very healthy, happy relationship, or at least a relationship that is not, in fact, headed towards its end. So having said all of that, let's quickly move through these stages, a couple of the characteristics. You can certainly follow along using the supplemental notes, and then we'll talk about a few of the characteristics that are important to note about this particular model. So initiation, this is where we start. This is catching somebody's eye across the party, or saying hello to somebody on the first day of school. It's that first contact, and it's really brief. It doesn't last long, because if that first contact leads to something more in the form of experimenting, then you've left initiation. If you've just said hi to that person and you walk away, you've initiated, and that's it. Experimenting is when you get to know the other person. You ask them questions, they respond, they ask you questions, you respond. It is a process of self-disclosure that builds trust and starts to form the relationship, whether it's for a short period of time or a long period of time. And in the beginning stages of a new relationship, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship, we actually experiment for a great deal of time. And in fact, many relationships continue with experimentation for years and years and years. You're always learning new things about yourself, and so you're always sharing those things with other people, and you're getting to know that person on much deeper levels the longer you're with them. Now, Corey Floyd talks about the relationship model, Knapp's model, as it pertains to social relationships, our friendships, for instance, or our work relationships. But really, I do think that this model should be reserved for romantic relationships and the most intense personal relationships. So like your best friend. And if you have 5 best friends, you haven't probably been through all of these stages with them, or you may have seen some of them. So I think as we're going through the model, I do want to encourage us to think about it more in terms of a romantic relationship, because I think you're going to see those stages, all of the stages present more in a romantic relationship than in other personal relationships. and in particular, the third stage, which is intensifying. So if we've experimented with another person and we like who they are and we're kind of getting into them a little bit, in a romantic relationship, intensifying is the bomb. And I don't use that lightly. It is fun and it is sexy and it's exciting. It's like you can't wait to see the other person. When you think about them, you get butterflies and your heart races and you want to like do little fun favors for them and give them little presents and you just can't wait to be with them. I always imagine with intensifying, I call it heart-shaped honeymoon eyes, like in the cartoons when your eyeballs turn into little hearts and they like bounce out of your head. That's what's going on here. It's all just hormones and lust and love and excitement, and you just can't get enough. It's totally the honeymoon phase. It's the ridiculousness of like falling asleep on the phone together. Well, that's what we did when, back before we had cell phones. Now we just text until we fall asleep. But then the phone pings and your heart races because you're like, oh, ooh, somebody's texting me. Maybe it's this person. So we get super excited. And it doesn't last. It is the greatest thing ever, but it's only really that intense for a few months, maybe a little shorter, maybe a little longer. Some of us never make it past intensifying. The real world kicks in and we're like, I'm over this person, done. But if we still like them after we've been intensifying for a little while, then we've moved into the true nature of an interpersonal romantic relationship or personal relationship of integrating. So this is an official relationship. You could feel intensifying in a new relationship with another person and they aren't there yet. Or maybe they'll never be there. So when you're in initiating, experimenting, and intensifying, you may not really be on the same page at the same time. But when you take the next step into integrating, now we're into relational maintenance. This is both people on the same page. We are officially in a relationship, and other people know. So it's a social unit of some kind. People kind of expect to see you together. You often reference the other person in conversations with third parties. You talk about we and us. So there tends to be this like perception of the two of you as a social unit. And once you're in an official relationship with another person, you become integrated and you don't lose that until the relationship terminates. Once you're integrated with another person, until termination, you're always integrated with that person. And that does mean it's not just the two of you, but also families and friends, that there's a overlap of your social circles. And this is one of the 5 behaviors to maintain relationships that also shows up in this chapter, the idea of the social network. Integrating is a huge component of that. The last of the coming together stages is bonding. It's at the very top. It is within relational maintenance. This is a formal commitment. It is made so that the people around you know that you are with this person. It is official. And so again, Corey Floyd does talk about like a business partnership being a bonding stage, or best friends, like, whatever it is, but friendship bracelets or something, I don't know. But really, like, I think talking about this in terms of the romantic relationship is the most applicable. Bonding is the moving in together, or the engagement, the marriage, the things that announce to the world that we are official. And I do throw the Facebook official thing on our handout, the supplemental notes, because it's also age appropriate. Like, when you're 13, you're not moving in with your boyfriend or girlfriend. There's no engagement, at least not in America, but you can be Facebook official. So there are ways to have that strong commitment, that deep commitment to the other person, and have it be a social thing, just depending on like what age group you're at. But when you're an adult, bonding really is kind of taking it to the next level. All right, so now to the other side, the coming apart side. Differentiating is on the same level as bonding. It's at the very, very top of this chart. It's in the relational maintenance stage. And that should let you know that it's actually a pretty important and valuable component to a relationship. This is where I do really disagree with how Corey writes about in the book. differentiating is like the beginning of the end. You know, he puts it as a completely different model, step by step by step, side by side. And I see it very differently. And in fact, the original Knapp's model demonstrated it more like what I'm showing you here, which is why I stick with this model, which this image actually originally came from the Adler and Proctor text that I used to use. So differentiating in the textbook is you see the differences, they're starting to be annoying. It's kind of like you don't want to really be around that person anymore because you are differentiating. Those differences are becoming something that you want to be separated from. But in a healthy relationship, and that, in fact, that could be true. That could be the very beginning of the coming apart stages, for sure. But if it's a healthy relationship, you actually need some level of differentiation. You are not always going to love every single thing about the other person. There are going to be some things that really annoy you. That's a fact of life. There will be conflict, and there will definitely be times when you're like, I just need to get away from you. But that's actually, it's a healthy thing, because if everything is always perfect and you are always together, then that can create some level of codependency in the relationship. You never have a chance to like express differences, and that can kind of, it's boring, first of all, but it also, in my eyes, it's not necessarily like a demonstration of health in the relationship. We in every relationship, we need our own thing. We need our own friends, our own hobbies. We need to be able to kind of do us and let them do them in separate spaces. And I think it creates a stronger bond. It brings you together again with more strength because you've had that slight separation. And some couples do struggle with this. Go back to the dialectical tensions for a second. If you have both parties who really value closeness, then, or connectedness, then this is going to be a difficult stage for you to embrace, because you always want to be together. But if you have one person who is more autonomous, then they're going to want to differentiate. They're going to be like, well, I'm going, you know, away for the weekend with my best friend, or I'm going to go, you know, out for the day. I'll be back later tonight, you know, see you later. They're going to want to do their own thing, and they're going to see that that's a healthy thing, and it's going to keep them feeling good about the relationship. But the person who values the connectedness is going to worry about that, and they're going to think, well, what, you know, what's wrong with our relationship? You have to talk about this. If this is present in your relationship, you need to have discussion, because this could be, to one person, it could be a signal that the relationship is ending, and to the other person, it could be perfectly healthy. You need to meta-communicate here. So, assuming that differentiating is healthy and there's nothing wrong with it, we're still in relational maintenance, this is a good thing. Use it to your benefit. Now, circumscribing, also in the relational maintenance circle at the top here, is constantly, it's not healthy. A little bit here and there, perfectly normal. This is about communication. So when you've been with somebody for a while, you don't always have things to talk about. Sometimes it's just quiet. Sometimes the conversations are boring. Sometimes it's like you're in a little bit of a rut, and it's kind of, you know, how was your day? Fine. How was yours? Fine. And then the crickets chirp for a little while. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. If it's all the time and there's nothing exciting to talk about, then that's where it becomes like a little red flag. You know, just pay attention. You're never going to hold on to the exciting conversations that were taking place back in intensifying. Those are not going to be present for your entire relationship. But if you are at a point in a relationship with another person, there's nothing to talk about anymore, then that's full-on circumscribing. It's beyond a red flag, and in fact, that's where we are going down to the next stage and moving into stagnation, where we're just bored. But if it's healthy circumscribing, don't worry about it. Just pay attention. All right, so stagnating, this is just like it sounds. There is no movement, there's no breath, there's no life. It's just sitting still in the relationship. And as human beings, we need growth, we need change. We do need this to stay healthy, and that's true of our relationships as well. Now, I do want to put a caveat here because some people kind of like being and stagnating. If you are a person who really values high levels of predictability, then stagnating can actually feel kind of comfortable to you. Some of us might have parents or grandparents or friends who have been in stagnating for years and even decades, and they're okay with it. You know, every night's the same. They know what to expect. They go on the same vacations every year, and there is comfort in that. And to actually not have that level of predictability would make them very anxious. But for others, and particularly if you are a more novel type, that's going to be very boring. You're going to hate that relationship. You're going to want to avoid your partner and your life together. And so it's not going to work. So it's in kind of the middle of coming apart, but I do want to let you know that it's not always a coming apart stage. Some people can live here comfortably for a while. If, however, one person's like, you know, I want to mix it up a little bit, and the other person's not having it, then you may be in some trouble there. All right, so avoiding when one or both parties is avoiding the other party. And in our relationship or our technology-driven world, I mean, certainly we can do this even in the same room. We both stare at our phones. We both stare at separate screens. Frankly, we could stare at the same screen, but if we're not talking or looking at each other, we're still kind of avoiding. But eventually it gets to a point where avoiding becomes more. One person is leaving the house or not home as much. They're going out with their friends. And to jump back for a second to stagnating, imagine for a minute you have one person who's saying, I want to mix this up. Like, let's go take a dancing class, or let's go on a vacation, or let's go on a different vacation, or, you know, let's, you know, excuse me for saying this, but let's try something new in the bedroom, like something, let's shake it up. And the other person's like, nah, I'm good. I think we're fine the way we are. Then the person who proposed the changes is going to be like, well, you know, fine. I'll go take a dancing class. I'll go, you know, take a vacation with my best friend. This is where people become involved in affairs most often, emotional affairs or full-blown sexual affairs, because they are no longer feeling the excitement in their own relationship. That stagnation has gotten to them, and so they avoid by becoming involved with somebody else. But it's not necessarily the case. Maybe they just are no longer fully present in the relationship, and this can't last. It almost never does. Eventually it leads to terminating because one or both parties is like, I'm done, I just can't, and then they walk away. So this model is a lot more complicated in this form than just what we see in the text, and specifically the difference between differentiating here and differentiating there, and then also what we see at the very top, the stages of maintaining this relationship, what brings us together, what pulls us apart, but then how do we maintain it as well.